Welcome back to Normal Ireland Live. I'm Callum Taylor, and I am delighted to be joined this evening by friend of the show, Khanifesto. Hello, how are you doing?
Hello, hello. I'm doing very well. How are you doing?
I'm all right. I'm loving the rebrand. It's very, very you. Yeah, how's life? It's been a bit of a crazy week in politics, hasn't it? How have you?
Yeah, it's definitely been an interesting start to the year. I think every year when it comes to politics, we say it feels like it's going to be World War III. So I just
Yeah.
feel like I'm about there at the moment.
Yeah, no, I'm totally there with you. Unfortunately, it's been. I saw a meme the other day that was. It was two seagulls, and one of them was saying to the other, "Oh, what a year it's been," and the other was like, "There's only been 2 weeks." I'm like, "Yeah, it's been like that already." But anyway, we'll chat shortly. Let's have a look and see what is coming up on tonight's show. So Corbyn and Sultana unveil rival slates for your party. For your party, sorry. There's chaos after Robert Jenrick defects to Reform in a social and is a social media ban for under 16s on the horizon. I've not formatted my autocue properly tonight, guys, so I do apologise for the blunders already. Anyway, you can help us to grow by visiting turnleftmedia.co.uk/support to help fund our work, or by becoming a YouTube member. And I can see in the chat that we've already got some memberships have been gifted, so thank you for that. Now, let's move to our first story. Since the conference, news surrounding your party has been fairly quiet. Things are ramping up again as Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana announced their respective slates for your party CEC elections, in which voting will take place between the 9th and the 23rd of February. Last year, the party voted for a collective leadership model instead of one sole leader. These CEC elections will see members of the party voted into a broad leadership team. This is Jeremy Corbyn announcing for the many today.
Let's get your party back on track.
The last 6 months have been difficult, but now we have a chance to turn things around because your party is about to elect its first leadership team. And we have a choice. Do we take the fight to Starmer and Farage or fight each other? Are we a party for the people or a party for ourselves?
When your party was first announced, hundreds of thousands of people were excited at the prospect of a mass party that could challenge for real change, not a fringe party scrapping at the margins.
They saw the potential for the broad alliance, forged by the energy of the pro-Palestinian movement and the deep anger at the Starmer's Labour, but that alliance has been damaged. It needs repair.
That's why we are launching The Many, a campaign to build that mass left party that can bring about real change.
Our approach has 3 pillars. We will win people to our cause by campaigning tirelessly on issues that matter to them, from sky-high bills to the housing crisis and the NHS privatisation.
We will mend our cross-community coalition by focusing on what unites us, not what drives us apart.
Restoring trust in the left where it has been broken.
And we will build our base by organising in working class communities. This has to work. We owe it to the millions abandoned by Labour, struggling to make ends meet, to everyone horrified at the government's complicity in genocide, and to all those on the sharp end of far-right racism.
Let's unite on a socialist platform committed to putting wealth and power in the hands of the majority, not the billionaires and corporations.
From the picket line to the ballot box, this party can rise to the moment. So sign up today.
And together, we will build a party for the many.
Now, this excerpt from a statement made by the Many Slate. It reads, "The Many will field candidates for the first elections to your party CEC, which will constitute the party's collective leadership. Corbyn is expected to run alongside fellow MPs Shoka Adam and Ayub Khan, who spoke at the party's founding conference in November. Other candidates for the Many include Laura Smith, a former firebrand left-wing Labour MP under Corbyn, who is now an independent councillor, and Louise Reagan, a senior trade unionist with the National Education Union and the national chair of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign. In the launch video, the Many recognises the damage done to your party in recent months, but promises to repair the social alliance that the party promised, united by outrage at British complicity Israel's Gaza genocide and disillusionment with Starmer's Labour. Now, meanwhile, Zara Sultana unveiled the grassroots left, in which she describes as a member-led campaign for real democracy, empowered branches and socialist anti-imperialist politics.
I'm Zara Sultana and I'm a Your Party Member of Parliament.
I'm a community activist and Your Party Bristol organiser.
I'm a mother and an ex-Labour parliamentary candidate in a red wall seat.
I'm a teacher.
I'm a community organiser, reparations campaigner and RMT union activist.
I'm standing for the CEC
because I want a strong party that's built from the ground up.
I want to ensure we can build a party with strong local branches.
With power in members' hands.
I want a party able to stand up for public ownership
and real distribution.
I want to stand against war and imperialism.
I want a party that stands unequivocally
with Venezuela, Congo, Sudan and Palestine.
And all other places suffering at the hands of imperialism.
I want a party that won't betray the working class.
A party where at least 50% of membership subs go straight to branches for local campaigns.
Because branches know their communities.
And communities win local struggles and fights.
Because we know socialism isn't delivered from the top.
It's built together.
From below.
We oppose NATO.
And the forever wars that politicians drag us into.
We stand on picket lines with trade unions.
And we will defend marginalised communities.
And we confront the far right.
Every time.
Every time.
Every time.
Because if you come for one of us,
you come for all of us.
All of us.
For all of us.
All of us.
We didn't leave the Labour Party
to build another top-down machine.
That means no more witch hunts.
The grassroots left slate will fight for openness.
And accountability.
For recallable representatives.
Real member control.
Together, we will build
a democratic,
pluralist,
socialist party.
One that can win power
and never lose itself
once it does.
When you receive your ballot,
vote for the grassroots left.
Vote for the grassroots left.
Vote for the grassroots left.
You will get your data,
your money,
your candidate.
Because it's your party.
Your party.
Your party.
Let's win maximum member democracy.
And build a party we can all be proud to call our own.
Now, candidates included in the grassroots left will be Democratic Socialists for Your Party, Max Shanley, Fire Brigades Union Officer Ricardo Latorre, and Anjona Roy, an activist for Unison. Sources from the party described this as a proxy war, as Sky News reported on the 12th. The list endorsed by Ms Sultana has called itself the Grassroots Left Slate and includes both her and Mr Corbyn. However, the former Labour leader is understood to be upset about this, as he had asked for his name to be taken off this slate. He feels the inclusion of his name gives the impression that this is a unity list that he was involved with and endorses. Yet another source had a different tone when speaking to Novara Media. Candidates have legitimate disagreements about the direction and strategy of the New Left Party, and that members getting to... Sorry, let me start that again. Candidates have legitimate disagreements about the direction and strategy of the New Left Party, and that members getting to choose a leadership team that reflects their issues is what building a democratic party is all about. The Your Party source added, these elections can draw a line in the sand and empower a new CEC to move forward and focus on the issues that matter. Now, when the party was first announced, they enjoyed favourable polling, including one in which the party was level pegging with Labour, both receiving 15%. Yet, since the internal fights and the surge in support for the Greens has seen, the party have lost momentum, with a recent poll putting them on less than 1%. 0.6 to be precise, which is a far cry from the double-digit polling last year. Now, it's worth pointing out that this is only one poll. Khanifesto, what do you think of Corbyn and Sultana being on different slates? Is this a proxy war or a genuine democratic process where robust debates can be had?
I don't necessarily think I'd capitulate to the mainstream media's framing of this being a proxy war. I think that's obviously trying to churn a certain narrative. But I will comment on the two different wings that you have here, and you have always had since the conception of your party, which is the Corbyn wing and Sultana's wing, grassroots left and the many. Now, when we take a look at the membership model of your party and the sort of membership model that they're trying to go for the elections, you see something very similar to France, for example, with the New Popular Front or other trade unions across Europe and Latin America. And specifically in France, which was a broad coalition of left wing parties but didn't have a single leader despite having many prominent figures within the party, it worked. I mean, in 2024 in the National Assembly, they gained a majority. So if I'm commenting purely off the two wings and approaches we have had here, the skepticism about a grassroots movement and a grassroots collective leadership model not working can be remedied by the fact there's already a party that has successfully done this in Western Europe. Now, on the other hand, I think one of the things you could argue here is the fact there's already two opposing wings to begin with there marks a real issue. But these things are prominent within political parties, and I'd argue largely if the base is covered on an alignment on policy, domestically and internationally, you can have real success. And like you said, it's still early days. So I think we need to wait see what happens. But I do think Zara Sultana is offering a fresh alternative that if members want to go for it, they can. And personally, I believe that there's never too many options for a left-wing party in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, what do you make of the polling? I mean, do you think they can regain support once the party becomes more sort of outward facing? Do you think that they'll be able to bring that back and get back to where they were last year?
I think that they can if they focus on grassroots organizing, especially union connectedship. But I think you cannot divorce from the fact, even with like the New Popular Front that I was talking about in France, you need a coalition of parties to not split the left, right? So it is one thing, of course, organizing to get those numbers up. But another thing is looking at alignments that they can make with the Green Party. That's completely essential here. If you have small scale representation but genuine grassroots movements, what you end up with is something like the Trade Union Socialist Coalition, essentially small numbers but is punished under first past the post. But if you essentially have some sort of party alignment that Zara Sultana and Corbyn have spoke about, then you can have real success in numbers. So I think what we can learn from here is, there needs to be a balance of both grassroots movements, but also a balance of sharing the vote so it doesn't get split, so they can boost those numbers higher.
But can they get that party alignment if you've got Zara Sultana's team putting Corbyn's name down on a slate when Corbyn hasn't consented to that, and then Corbyn's getting angry about the fact that they're doing that? We're just seeing more of the same, are we not? I mean, there was lots of talk at party conference about the divisions and the divides, and Zara talked to me about unnamed bureaucrats who many in the party named very loudly and very clearly as people within Corbyn's camp. So if unity is the key, and if as the many Slate have suggested, that they want to try and unite together, and they're recognizing some of the problems of the past, but they want to bring it together to a form of unity. Why aren't they standing together? Why are they even putting these two opposing slates, against each other, and not just saying as one voice, these are the candidates we'd like to put forward, let's all stand and vote on individual merit rather than on which tie of the party which wing of the party you tie yourself to?
Well, in political parties, generally, you will have different factions or different sects. I mean, even within the Green Party, you had the more broad church alignment that you had with Ellie Challenger and Adrian Ramsey compared to Zach Polanski's more populist narrative, which in the end his wing got mandated, and it's introduced mechanisms within the party.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I do think that's a little bit different though, because with the Greens, at least the Green Party are established. People already know who they are. Yeah. They've already got policies and procedures in place. Publicly, people know who the Green Party are. So when you've got small factions and you've got, even if it's big factions at the top in terms of leadership debates, the party itself kind of remains the same. Until the CEC is established, nobody actually knows what your party is going to look like. So surely it's more important than it's more important to be different from those other parties and not to have those factions, surely.
Well, again, if that wing gets mandated, which is Sultana's wing, I would argue that the mechanisms introduced could favour some similarity to the Green Party, and in that there will always be political discussions, but ultimately what will happen is you have recallable delegates, like they mentioned, and you will have a one member, one vote thing across the board. So I do think there are similarities here. There are teething issues, which of course have been amplified by the fact that these are two very different opposing aisles, which we thought we're going to have a unified line. So I do think, like, as much as I hate to say it, I do think we need to have patience. But if I go back to what I was talking about earlier, especially with the New Popular Front in France, too much sectarianism can cause small scale numbers, right? You have genuine grassroots movements, but they don't have electoral viability. That is one thing I am worried about your party with a collective leadership model. Electoral viability goes down the drain because when you look to the electorate, they can't point to one leader. The Green Party have that now. Their main issue holding them back before I would argue was the co-leader arrangement with Carla Denia and Adrian Ramsey, but now they have one populist leader. To remedy that, I think what your party needs to do is move to a party alliance with the Greens in general. We have to see how that plays out, but there needs to be balance here where you do have left unity electorally, but you have something new, something fresh, which is a grassroots sort of organizing method.
How do you think the CEC setup will go down with the public? Because obviously, like you say, that the Green Party seem to struggle with the dual leadership, and this is kind of
Yeah.
like what your party are doing now is kind of what the Green Party did 15, 20 years ago, where
Yeah.
you've got like a committee at the top that are making the decisions, and then you have the spokespeople that will be the public facing, people of the party. Do you think the general public will get that? Do you think they'll understand it, or do you think it'll just add more confusion?
I think that in terms of viability, it will cause confusion ultimately. That is where I sit with the collective leadership model. I'm afraid I'm in agreement with you there. I think there are issues. I was really hoping with the Green Party they'd get rid of the co-leadership model because it just doesn't work. People in times, especially when we're seeing a trend in right-wing populism, want an authoritarian leader, right? That doesn't mean you have to be authoritarian back. It means you need to be populist. I mean, Zach Polanski talks about that a lot. He says, populism without solutions create problems, and that's what Farage does. He's a populist, but he doesn't have any real solutions, whereas Polanski is a populist, but he offers solutions. In that respect, your party will struggle massively in trying to get to the broad electorate who aren't massively engaged in politics, to sell them on a collective leadership model, let alone the UK has never seen something like this before. It's not the early 1920s or the post-war period as well, where these sort of collective party models are operating. It's a time in which people are more and more less engaged with politics, and they want something they can, point to like that. So I think that is going to cause an issue. Again, I just think there needs to be a unity between the Green Party and your party if your party wants to succeed. I think one could make the argument in a utilitarian sense, even if this from a certain perspective, I suppose, doesn't work or there's a lack of electoral viability, a genuine democratic socialist party can be there to keep these ideas alive. And I think those things are important. Political parties capitulate here and there. That's no different from, your party to the Green Party. That's just, we live in a liberal democracy. These things will happen. But I think it is important, even with some failures, if your party carries that forward, that there are genuine ideas of a large-scale democratic socialist economy, even if somewhat untenable. And I think Green Party members can benefit from that just as much.
I think obviously the concern within the Green Party at the moment is that they don't know what they're agreeing to sort of sign up to, because without proper policies and proper policy ideas around different issues, for the Greens it's very much of, well, who are your party and what do they stand for? Because we know what Corbyn stands for, we know what Zara Sultana stands for, but the party as a movement hasn't made that decision yet of what they want to. I mean, they've outlined some things. They want to say that they're socialists. They want to say that they're for working class people. Great, brilliant. We can get behind that. But what does it look like in terms of actual policy? And I mean, Zara's very vocally distanced herself from the Green Party over issues like NATO and the fact that Zach Polanski says that he would have diplomatic relationships with Israel. Now, from so that's from their perspective, but from the Greens' perspective, apart from that, we don't actually know what your party policy is. Something that I wanted to add, though, which I found really interesting when we covered the Your Party conference. A lot of members, mainly I heard this from people that didn't vote for the collective leadership, but even from those that did, were very quick to point out the fact that this is I think it's like a 2-year period that this will be in play for. Before the membership will then make a decision again as to whether they want to continue with the model that they've got or want a different leadership model. And I think there are many within your party that are hoping that this CEC setup will essentially be about the founding and the formation of the party. It will get the party up off the ground. It will get the policies decided on. It will get the party to a place where it's a much easier thing to present to the general public. And then I think the hope for some, it was a 52-48 vote, in favour of collective leadership. I think the hope for the rest is that in years or so's time, they'll go back to the members, and the members will then say, right, now it's time to have an actual leader, who can represent us, who is a single person, or maybe joint, depending on what they decide. Once the general sort of formation of the party has had chance to, once they've had a couple of years just to work things out and to work out who they are. And I think it'll be easy for the Green Party at that stage to then say, actually, we're happy to get involved with an electoral pact with you because we know what you're about.
Yeah, I think there is a safe bet that, generally speaking, from what we know about your party members and the defections and the general sense of values that Corbyn and Sultana stand for, that there will be some alignment. Of course, there is some sort of issues in terms of, with the representations that you have within Corbyn's slate, specifically with ties to, of course, previously the Liberal Democrats, or people that are standing only on like the Gaza issue, but not necessarily working class issues, which is, of course, nothing wrong with standing for Palestine. Absolutely not. Everyone should stand with Palestine unequivocally. The issue is when it's a single issue vote sort of thing, and there's disalignment on other socialist values. It is a bit weird to have a landlord in that slate, for example. It doesn't really add up. So, yeah, I think there will be those teething issues there, but I personally believe that without a layer of bureaucracy, if this is devolved to the members and, Sultana's wing does get mandated, these things will be easier to remedy, as every individual will have more likely a voice that they can, every individual will be able to voice their concern a lot easier compared to a far more bureaucratic model under Corbyn. So it's about taking a utilitarian view in this respect, where we're choosing which model we think will fit best for the members, rather than people that perhaps have different motives, either ideological or perhaps what they think will be best for the party. And we need to swing it in a direction where there's unity across your party and the Greens, based on a far more grassroots level.
No, I think that's totally fair. We should probably move on to our next story, but thank you for that. So this story has probably been one of the biggest political stories of the week. Reform UK has this week welcomed a number of former Tories. On Monday, Ben brought you the story of Nadeem Zahawi's defection. And more recently, Farage announced the former Conservative Lord Malcolm Offord would lead Reform UK in Scotland. And by now, you'll have all heard that the latest recruit to Reform UK, the new Conservative Party in a lighter shade of blue, is Robert Jenrick, a man who was in the shadow cabinet as recently as yesterday morning. He announced his defection last night after being sacked earlier that morning by Tory leader Kemi Badenoch amid rumours that he was planning to defect. Now, before we get onto the rather messy announcement, I want to take a quick look at what Farage and Jenrick have said historically. So to begin with, this is what Jenrick had to say about reform only last year.
Nigel Farage can't even run a five-a-side team, so he's not going to be able to run a country. They're not a serious party. We may have sympathy with some of the things that they say. We may understand why millions of our fellow countrymen and women have gone to reform, but they are not the answer.
Nigel Farage can't even run a five-a-side team. Yet you've just joined his bleeding party. Make it make sense. Farage and Reform UK have also had their fair share of things to say about Jenrick. Robert Jenrick stands with asylum seekers. The Tories can't be trusted. We've got another one. The Tories had 14 years in office. They let the British people down. Jenrick can't be trusted. And one more. When Robert Jenrick was immigration minister, he grew the number of illegal migrants living in free hotels to 56,000. He is no friend of Epping. And when Jenrick was hoping to lead the Conservative Party back in 2024, Nigel Farage said this. Formerly a man that believed in nothing, Robert Jenrick now pitches himself as a great hardliner. This is almost certainly done for political gain and not out of conviction. He will divide the party. I doubt that Jenrick will last long if he wins. So, just so we're all on the same page here, right, let's just recap. Nigel Farage, who, according to Jenrick, cannot even run a five-a-side team, has welcomed a man who he has claimed is a fraud, who stands with asylum seekers, grew the number of illegal migrants in hotels to 56,000, cannot be trusted, and acts for personal political gain, not out of conviction, to a party that Jenrick describes as unserious. Well, no shit. And if that wasn't enough of a pantomime already, let's take a quick look at what happened when Farage announced Jenrick's defection last night.
And on that note, I will welcome Robert Jenrick into this room and into Reform UK. All right. He hasn't changed his mind, has he? You can't find him. Is he coming, Nick? It's been a funny. This would be a very funny end of the day, wouldn't it? This really would put the tin lid on the whole thing. As you can tell, normally when I unveil defections, it's all perfectly planned. Nothing ever leaks, and I'm known for nothing ever leaking. But this circumstance has been sprung upon us for reasons that were not under my own control, sadly. Do we play music now, or what do we do? No. OK, folks, don't worry. I've just had the thumbs up. He hasn't changed his mind. Kemi hasn't called him and asked him back. Oddly, she never called him in the first place. She left it to the Chief Whip to do so, which I did find very, very odd. But, yeah, as I say, one more point before he comes. There's a lot of speculation in the media about who may or may not defect to us. Are they doing it for their own purposes? Are they a benefit to us? May the 7th, folks, if you're in Parliament, is the deadline. If you're coming to us, do it before May the 7th. We don't want you after that. Let me make that very, very clear to everybody in the room. Here he is, Robert Jenrick.
I mean, what a complete and utter shambles. It's the news story of the day. It's going to be on all of the morning papers, which it was today, and you can't even announce him as a new member of the party without him disappearing for 2 whole minutes. Like, what on earth was that all about? That said, would we expect anything less from a party that's led by a man who's happy to charge £75 to be tricked into recording a video in support of disgraced Lost Prophets singer and paedophile Ian Watkins?
This message is to pay tribute to Ian Watkins, a good man, a really good guy who was very much in contact with me, who loved his children and will be sorely, sorely missed by them forever. And he'll always hold that very special place in everybody's heart. And remember what he always said, mad lulz. Well, tell you what, that does just about sum up the world, doesn't it? Sorry for your grief, but please try and keep some happy memories.
I mean, this man will fall for anything. This is not the first time that he's fought for stuff like this either with his cameo appearances. There's multiple occasions where Nigel Farage has recorded videos for murderers, for paedophiles, for rapists. His greed is so fucking large that he will do ridiculous things like that because he wants an extra 75 quid in his pocket. Absolutely insane. Khanifesto, what do you make of yet another Tory jumping ship to Reform UK?
Well, Robert Jenrick is a man who, under the Conservative, was the Secretary to the Treasury, the Minister for Health, the Minister for Immigration, and I believe the Secretary for Housing, right? He had 4 different roles under the Conservatives. He is now launching a war against the Conservatives for saying this is the party that broke Britain. Who broke Britain? He didn't have one role, he didn't have two, he didn't have three, he had 4 different roles. And now he is coming to Reform UK and saying there was a party which he's just forgotten that he was a part of that broke Britain. By the way, I believe it was in 2020, specifically in the housing element, Robert Jenrick had fast tracked a private housing development firm for a company to basically stop getting regulated to build affordable housing units 1 day before those regulations were supposed to come in place. That saved the developer tens of millions of pounds. This is the man that's complaining that immigrants are ruining the housing market, yet being part of a party and being in a role that favored a millionaire private developer, which ruined housing for possible families that could be, now living in a comfortable and safe environment, but now has also jumped to another party to say the party before didn't take care of these issues. I think it's outstanding. I think it makes complete sense that this guy named his child's middle name Margaret Thatcher, which I think should be considered child abuse, but that's something else. But yeah, I think the audacity that he has to treat the British public as if they are stupid and as if he didn't have any role in destroying the country for the past 15 years. He's been a part of the Conservatives since he was 16, by the way, which he mentioned in that speech, is outstanding.
The other really interesting thing here as well is that there wasn't a plan for him to defect to Reform yesterday. When he woke up that morning, that wasn't the plan. Kemi Badenoch sacked him because some reports say that a printout of his resignation speech had been left on the printer and that had been found. So Kemi had no choice but to sack him. But even Farage was rattled by it because that press conference last night was actually supposed to be Reform and plans to take to order a judicial review and to take legal action against the government for plans to postpone some of the local elections until until May of next year. That was completely overthrown by the news of the morning. And then Jenrick presumably rushing around very quickly, getting on the phone to Nigel Farage and saying, I've been kicked out of my home. Could I come and stay with you for a while, please? But it's like, how much longer? Bear in mind, this guy was on the shadow cabinet, right? How much longer was he planning on staying, not only in the Conservative Party, but in the shadow cabinet before he was planning on defecting? Farage didn't, in the morning, Farage was asked about this. Bear in mind, he just announced the new Scottish leader of Reform UK. Farage was asked about Jenrick literally yesterday morning and said that, obviously I've been in talks with some people, but sometimes talks happen and nothing comes of it. And I think even he was shocked that later that day he was announcing Robert Jenrick as a new leader of as a new member of Reform UK and also another MP for Reform. Farage also said that Kemi Badenoch had handed him a late Christmas present because she sacked him. And it wasn't clear, as I say, whether it had been defecting or even if it was going to happen at all up until that point. I mean, what do you think? Do you think this is a win for Reform, or do you think ultimately, with all these ex-Tories coming to the party, do you think that will be their eventual downfall?
I think, largely speaking, when you look at, there's different demographics we can talk about here. The first thing we can talk about is the Conservative membership, right? Which now more likely be wanting to vote Reform, as Jenrick was polled as someone that was quite strong as an MP for the Tories. He was not, the strongest. Kemi Badenoch in some polls outdid him as leader, but he was a reason why a lot of Conservatives were staying within the Conservative Party with hopes that he may become leader. That's now obviously gone. That will be damage for the Conservatives and their base, so it'll be bad for them. It'll be good for Reform because they could get Conservative base. The other thing that I've seen by speaking to Reform voters and generally looking at what they're saying is there's almost a split here, right? There is a good amount of people that are skeptical with the councillor defections from the Tories to Reform, and also the fact that there's been people a part of Boris Johnson's government, I think it's about 4 to 5 now, that are now in Reform UK's party. But for others, Robert Jenrick marks a very right wing politician. And so they don't really care that much. They see him as someone having reform values, especially with some of his comments that were made about, walking down. Sorry, forgive me, I forgot which area he was specifically describing, and not seeing many white faces. Right? I'm not saying that all reform voters are like these ethno nationalists, but these sort of things about enclaves and small tight knit communities of immigrants is something that reform voters are more likely to want to agree with and hear. So Jenrick following that sort of line is quite consistent. So will it be bad for Reform UK? I mean, the sort of incompetence that we saw with the Conservative Party could come in with the Reform Party, but then you would have to argue that the Reform Party were planning on being competent anyways. So
True.
there's that.
I
The
think
second
there's. No, sorry, go on.
No, the second aspect I was saying is you could argue with the May 7th deadline that Farage is talking about in terms of council elections. He's left himself some breathing room to say, look, here, this is all we're taking. And after that, all you have is a party with some decent experience behind them. So there is this split between reform voters.
Yeah, well, Farage's rationale for that is basically what he's essentially said is that if you join the party now, you're doing it because you want the party to do well. If you wait until the party that you're currently in does badly at the elections, then you're doing it for personal gain. But I mean, that's a ludicrous argument. There isn't anyone more ambitious for personal ambition and personal gain within politics right now than Robert Jenrick, and he's 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 given up potentially becoming the next leader of the Conservative Party in order to join Reform. But surely, his ambition hasn't just disappeared overnight. Let's be realistic here. So yeah, I mean, I do think that will buy him some breathing room, though. I do think you're right there. But I wonder. I think one of the journalists that were at the press conference last night pointed this out, that I think there's something like 7 members or former members of Boris Johnson's cabinet who are now members of Reform UK. And Farage and co have spent the best part of the last 2 years talking about how Boris Johnson largely and his government completely ruined and mishandled Brexit, completely ruined and mishandled the pandemic, because obviously they're all anti-lockdown and they're not happy with the way that was all carried out, and essentially blaming the very people who are now in the party for what Robert Jenrick describes as breaking Britain. So from a public perspective, from people out on the outside looking in, do you think we're going to see people? I mean, I suppose it depends how much faith we have in the electorate, but do we think that people are going to look at this and go, well, hang on a second, this is literally the very same people that we just voted out, now just wearing a lighter shade of blue? Or do you think it won't matter because it's got Reform branding and it's got Farage at the helm?
No, I don't think most people will care about this, if I'm completely honest. There'll be a small sector of the Reform membership base that perhaps have skepticisms, but I largely think that the people that Reform are trying to cultivate and trying to draw to their party won't really care about this. The reason for that is Reform has a near monopoly on being like the current surging right-wing tea, right? The Conservatives are basically dead. They, with Robert Jenrick defecting, I'm not sure how Kemi Badenoch can bounce from this. So even if someone's skeptical, they don't really feel like they have any other choice anyways. The second thing is, like I said previously, Jenrick already was quite a right-wing MP. I mean, he'd been launching his grift for quite a while, and so this adds credibility to that. One thing I do want to say, though, is Jenrick being on that stage talking about how this is now time to change Britain, to fix it, is obviously a farce. I mean, he was just waiting for the right moment to grift. It's just terrible that, I guess, for him, he got caught out. But that's not necessarily a defect but of politics, right? That's more so an inherent, I guess, byproduct that people and politicians treat political parties as team sports that they can just, abandon and now dress up that they're being anti-establishment. And that's exactly what Jenrick is doing. I mean, he's just going where the wind is blowing hardest, right? He's grifting, but it's not by any means because he's incompetent. It's because the system allows him to do that. And until politics becomes about treating people's material conditions rather than just focused on careerism and, representing the elites, the capitalists, then we're going to see multiple different Jenricks with different badges that could be in Reform, and they have that near monopoly, so that won't change unless politics fundamentally changes.
No, I agree. There was something else that Farage said in that press conference that I actually thought was really good, actually. And I feel like we were talking about your party earlier. I feel like your party could learn a lot from this. And this is Farage's number one rule that he has for people joining the party, which he says is that, anyone within the party is free to criticize him or have issues with him, but they have to do it behind closed doors.
Yeah.
No airing dirty laundry in public. I mean, when Rupert Lowe tried that, he was gone. And actually, I think it's probably the first time I've actually heard Nigel Farage say that. But when I think back, that is something that Farage is really good at doing. It's making sure that any sort of falling outs like that don't happen publicly. And I really think that the left could learn a lot from that. I mean, we've heard Zach Polanski talking about how he's learned things from Reform and from Farage in terms of comm strategy and the populism side of it. Zach talks about eco populism. I think we on the left could learn a lot from not airing our dirty laundry in public as well.
Yeah, I agree. You stand strong, united in public, and private is where you have that discourse. I guess you could say in Zara Sultana's defense, she felt like she was up against too much of a bureaucracy, where she wanted to signal that the grassroots movement could take over and sort of channel that the public and the people and the working class have control. So I guess you could argue that in her defense. But yeah, a general sense of unity is needed amongst the left.
No, 100%. But anyway, we should probably move on. But thank you. Actually, just before we do move on, obviously it's 2026 now, and we really, really want this year to be a big year for Turn Left. We want to be more ambitious than last year, and we really want to be able to see this wonderful community that we've created get bigger and better. So we'd like 2026 to be the year that we can get our own studio, for example. And for our contributors to actually be paid for the work that we do, because as you know, we are all volunteers. Your support over the years has been incredible, and we're really ready to take Turn Left to the next level. We do rely on small donations at the moment, so if you want to be part of a media organisation that seeks to destroy the oligarchs, then please head over to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support, where you can support us monthly on Patreon, or you can use the other link there for a one-time contribution and donation. You can also become a YouTube member for just 99p, or if you are gifted one by some of our wonderful community, and we'll come on to those later in the show. But I just want to say that the memberships that have been gifted tonight are incredible. So thank you so much for those of you that are supporting us. Now, let's move on to our final story. Labour MPs are expecting the government to U-turn on its opposition to social media bans for under-16s next week. Multiple Labour MPs are putting pressure on the government to adopt an Australian-style ban. A motion has been tabled in the House of Lords to the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill, which would force social media platforms to use highly effective age assurance. Let me start that again. Which would force social media platforms to use highly effective age assurance measures to prevent children under 16 from accessing services. If voted for in the Lords on Wednesday, this would allow MPs in the House of Commons to then vote on the policy, where MPs believe that there is a majority in favour. When asked for his views on the matter, the Prime Minister Keir Starmer has said that, quote, all options are on the table. Now, Khanifesto, should the government go ahead with this ban, do you think? Or do you think it's a bit of a government overreach?
Well, I'm not going to start talking about government overreach because I don't want to sound like a libertarian, but I will talk about how social media bans have affected younger people in different countries and similar policies by proxy to that. I think one of the main issues with treating just social media as the issue is it misses out the fact why young people are on social media and why those issues are coming up. We have issues such as tech regulation. We have the fact that children are spend time indoors. There's not really any third spaces available due to austerity and the cutting of course, local council budgets for youth centres. And also the fact that people are hyper individualistic now, right? Post neoliberalism, it's created a culture even for children where they're seen as subjects in the world, in society, rather than members of society themselves, right? This can channel into hyper online communities, and all of these issues can be connected to the sort of shifting of economics that we saw in the 80s and 90s. So I don't necessarily think that social media is the issue. I don't think it's that damn phone. Yeah, I'm going to say it's not the damn phone. It's not technology. It's the material conditions behind these things which cause this. In regards to the data behind this, specifically for Australia, there's little evidence that has been showed by Columbia University, that's one study, that there is a causal effect for either net benefit or net harm for banning social media. In South Korea, you also had a policy which was not generally about Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, but about gaming, where midnight gaming was to be banned. What you have as an issue, though, is when these sorts of mainstream platforms such as Instagram, TikTok, or Snapchat that kids usually use are banned, kids can find workarounds, VPNs, for example, onion browsers, which is like the dark web, and this can expose them to more harmful and more risky sites with much more deregulated information. So one of the byproducts of harming these things, it ignores the fact that kids will want to do these things anyways, and it pushes them, I guess you could say, into a black market of technology, which could be far more harmful for them. So I don't necessarily think this thing, I don't think it will help. Why the Labour government is doing this, I personally think it's for reasons that are just to do with optics. It looks like they're doing something rather than nothing. But yeah, I would be personally opposed to it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned actually about people being pushed down into sort of other pipelines. I was reading an article the other day. It was a really interesting piece about the Online Safety Act, and it was essentially talking about the fact that because now age verification is required for people to access adult websites, the worry is that we're going to see a rise in people accessing not only extreme material but also illegal material,
Yeah.
and there was a worry that it would actually lead more people to start viewing this extreme content, not because they were specifically looking for it, but because they don't feel comfortable scanning their face or putting their ID into a sort of a regulated website, so they go looking for that content elsewhere. And if you find a website that isn't going to follow the age verification laws, that isn't going to ask you for ID, the chances are it's sort of place that's going to care less about what content it's got on the site and other laws around what it can and can't host and push out to people. So obviously the concern there would be that you regulate it to the point where, like you say, you actually put people in more danger, which I thought was a really interesting point, because up until now I would say I've always been pretty in favor of not having under 16s on social media. I think it's very toxic, particularly now more than it ever was. I think it causes lots of problems with mental health. Excuse me. There's also the obvious safety aspect of things like grooming, for example. But even like the cyberbullying and whatnot. When I was growing up, I mean, I'm 30, and when I was a teenager, Facebook had just sort of come out. We had MSN Messenger, we had the back end of MySpace and Bebo, but even that was a lot. The cyberbullying that went on MSN Messenger, when people at school would come on with a random email address, a throwaway email address that they'd made so they could send you nasty messages, or people posting nasty things about you, like that took its toll. And compared to today, like that was like nothing. So I do think that in the long term, I think it's a safer bet to keep kids off of social media. But yeah, I do worry as well, like you've talked about, is in terms of whether or not an all-out ban actually pushes them into a place of less safety.
Yeah, well, one thing I'd say regarding the main issues that you also mentioned is, I think blanket bans also don't allow tech companies to be held responsible for the content they're pushing out. It sort of sweeps it to the side. And you create this general sense that big tech doesn't need to be regulated, not just for, children, but possibly also for adults. And I think one thing that we were massively seeing as an issue with the sort of tech companies that come out specifically out of Silicon Valley and the US is with Grok, right? We've seen over the week what those things are causing. And without a push for digital rights of a sort, or digital regulation, we do fall into these pitfalls where we just wash everything aside, pretend that like people being hyper online or the issues faced online aren't to do with near monopolies, subsidies, Silicon Valley, or the issues with general tech overall, and also the issues with why people are going online, but rather just technology as a whole. Technology is a neutral tool. Innovation is neutral. It's only when it becomes adopted under certain circumstances can it become bad or can it become good, right? And in these conditions that we're seeing tech being used, it's for this ever-inflating bubble which will at some point burst with no regulation, when it actually could be used to help. I mean, of course, there should be some sort of parental guidance for technology, but I also heard stories about mothers and fathers talking about the fact that their children have rare genetic conditions where they were able to use social media to find influences, right? Which they could relate to in other small communities, which were still accessible with some sort of regulation. And so I would say, okay, well, if you want to get rid of this, you need to provide some form of substitute. You need to either create a third space, or you need to put the economic policies in where children are integrating more into society and can feel comfortable doing so.
Yeah, I think a lot of us can relate to growing up and joining sort of online forums. I think for me it was Facebook groups with like-minded people. Whether it's like what you talk about, with people with like rare conditions or illnesses, but even spaces for people that just feel like they haven't got anywhere. I mean, a lot of fandoms for different shows. There's lots of like groups that comes together for that, for people to make friends and meet. And especially if you're one of those kids that doesn't fit in school and that's finding it hard, there to have a community that you can go to when you get home that's online does really have its benefits. But then, are we too reliant on that? Because there's also a part of me that thinks surely it will be better if those kids could go and get that same sense of community from the local youth clubs, which obviously the Tories spent the last, decade and more closing. We need these spaces, like you said before, where kids can actually, they can finish school at the end of the day and they can go out to a club, they can go out to a sports club or to a whether it's D&D or like a games thing or something else, where they can mix with people that are like them and where they can get that sense of community and of togetherness in a way that's real, in a way that isn't just online.
Yeah, I 100% agree.
What's interesting with this story as well is that the Lib Dems have actually opposed any plans to ban social media for under 16s. What they're suggesting instead is an introduction an age certificate tool similar to what we see with films, where there's like a rating, a 12 or a 12A or a 15 or an 18, and applying those ratings to different social media services, based partly on how addictive the service is and also on the type of content that the service provides. So, for example, you might have a situation where, I don't know, Facebook might be rated a 12, but X might be rated an 18. It will be different ages for different platforms. And that would mean that there would be more regulation, but it wouldn't completely isolate children from accessing social media, full stop. What's really interesting is the NSPCC have actually said, I'm not quoting directly, but they've essentially said that, a complex issue calls for a more complicated solution than just a simple blanket ban. And they actually agree with the Lib Dems and have said that they think that would be a much more beneficial way of regulating social media than just out and out banning it for under 16s, which I thought was interesting that if the NSPCC think that. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but I realise that
Sorry,
wasn't a question.
sorry, I just cut out a bit there. No, I find it interesting. I guess the proposal could work, but I would yeah, I'd go back to the previous part of our conversation, which I think these are sort of surface level addresses to manage accessibility short term, and like me and you agreed upon, we should be focusing long term on what younger people need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, 100%. Well, listen, Khanifesto, that's the stories for today. I think we should probably head to the comments. I think it's time that we bring in our producer, who is absolutely Sarah. So who is it?
It's Sarah, obviously.
Oh, what a surprise.
Hello. Yeah, I'm always behind the scenes, guys. Just chilling in the back. But honestly, what a great show. Insightful, like the level of analysis. And also, can we please reflect on the level of generosity we've received today? Like, honestly, you guys are so fantastic, so generous, so wonderful.
To confirm,
So let's
Sarah,
just
we're gonna go through, right? We're gonna go through one by one everyone that's received a membership. Yeah, is that what we're gonna do?
Please, we've got traitors to catch up on. I do not
we'll
have
be here at 10 o'clock. Yeah.
time. We would be. No, I've got traitors, guys. Come on, we cannot miss.
Can I just say before you bring up any, I just want to bring up what Autumn Leaves has just said. Good to have hydrated hosts. Other shows tend to overlook that. Yes, drink water, folks, please.
Yeah, please, drink your water. I
Sorry,
drink
go
a
on.
little bit more myself. But let's start off with Michael Legend. Always present, always here. He gifted 5 turn left memberships, which was super
Cheers,
wonderful.
Michael.
And then Subsystem Vids gifted 50. Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I just have to scroll down because
Thanks,
that was 50
Subs.
memberships gifted. Please bear with me. Oh my god, I should have started. I'm such a twat. Yuri Gibson gifted 5 turn left members. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Yuri.
And then because that wasn't enough for Subsystem gifted another 50 turn left memberships, which is just so incredibly generous. Like,
thank you.
Gosh, don't put yourself out, guys, but honestly. And then Subsystem Vid said, listen, not enough. Here's 20 more, which is super wonderful. So thank you. And sorry, 2 seconds. Chucky gifted 5 turn left memberships. Thank you so much. Fulmer Music gifted 10 turn left memberships. Again, thank you so much. Someone was hating on your hair, guys, in the comments, which I think is so uncalled for. Turn left has the best hair known to existence, and Rachel gifted $2 saying ASL. Good to see you guys. Your hair looks great.
Yeah, that's taken us back.
It is
30 somewhere in the northwest of England.
27 F and location not going to disclose. But back then we were reckless. We were like, yeah, I'm from da-da-da. And it's like now we're like, no, I'm not telling you where I live.
This is my address. Yeah. Random stranger on the internet.
And then obviously so wonderful. Doe. How do you pronounce this?
Deus Ex. We established it was Deus Ex.
Yeah. Sorry. 5 turn left memberships. Thank you so much. Now we can get into the crux of it all.
Is anyone adding this up then? Is this about 150 memberships that have been gifted tonight?
Listen, I count on my fingers, so I'm not the best person.
50, 2 lots of 50, 120, a number of 5s. Yeah.
50,
just
50,
thanks,
20,
guys.
5, 10, 10, 10, 5. Honestly, 10s across the board, as RuPaul would say. So, Secret Dance Move said, what the hell is the unquote many? And that's because in the video that Corbyn had released, it was for the many.
Yes,
so there were lots of criticisms actually about Corbyn and your party in general, and I was intrigued to get these up because I think it's good to show a different side. But John the Brazen said, I don't think your party understands how only talking about Palestine whilst living standards are declining has alienated many people from the left. We need bread and butter issues to be addressed. And then John the Brazen just added after that, I don't think these people understand how to speak to people who aren't informed politically. And I think one thing that I will stand on, and I might be criticised on this, is that I think the left can be so, ironically, just a little bit elitist in our language and the way that we tackle politics. I think we're so often like, well, have you read so and so, and have you read Marx, and did you understand what this said, and blah blah blah. And it's like, fucking hell, like, people aren't going to understand Marx. I didn't understand Marx when I first read the Communist Manifesto, so I had to read and watch videos that kind of diluted it for me because it's so archaic in language. But I do think a lot of the things on the left, the infighting on the left, tends to happen because of you know, a misalignment in values. I mean, what do you guys think?
I think that I'll tell you what was interesting attending conference, right? And other people have alluded to the fact that I know somebody in the Greens have said that, you know, oh, it's great that your party are here because all the lefties that want to fight can just go and do that, and the Greens can actually build a movement. But what was really interesting to see was actually those people that were there, that were engaged with the debates, that were engaged with the conversations. Yes, there was definitely a feeling of one of sort of over. I'm trying to think of the right word. Over academizing, if that's even a word. You know, overly. Everything was overly academic a lot of the time, but also even in like some of the debates, like there was a whole debate as to whether or not they should call themselves a socialist party, and it just felt a bit like it was like, okay, I get that it's all been established, but why is that members of the public genuinely don't care if you call yourself socialist or not. What they care about is whether or not you're going to fund public services, whether or not people are going to have more money in the pockets, whether or not the buses are going to run on time. You know, are they going to be able to afford to pay for the bills? Is their electric and gas bill going to come down? Are they going to have food on the table? If you want to call that socialism, brilliant. And obviously we've got to remember that we are we're strange, right? We're weirdos, and I mean that as a compliment to everybody watching. Your average Joe on the street, they're not as interested in politics as we are. They don't follow it as closely as we do. They're certainly not interested in the academic side of it. What they care about is the things that they can grab with their hands and say, this is my reality, and am I better off? So I definitely think there is an element of that. That said, the people with experience within your party are absolutely in tune with and understand how to speak to people that aren't informed politically. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn has been an MP in his constituency for years, and he will, journalists go out with him for the day, and they can't get a word in because every 2 minutes somebody in Islington North is stopping him, want to speak to him, and he remembers people. He remembers people who he's helped. He understands the issues that they've faced. He's very much in tune with the local community. So I think there's a balance. I think that they definitely there's an element of that almost political elitism and sort of disconnect with reality. But actually, at a political conference that is about internal politics, we'd expect that. We see exactly the same at the Green Party, even Labour and the Conservatives at conference. They're all, very much, I'm more political than you. My knowledge is better than yours, and it's all just a bit of a pompous politics show. I think we do need to get the public messaging out as well, and see what they do publicly. But I'm going to stop ranting.
No, it's fine. I don't think we need to dumb anything down. I just think we need to make things more accessible. I just don't think that things are accessible enough. I think in terms of language, particularly like you mentioned, certain things that I mentioned, I think sometimes just make things accessible. The way that I would pitch something to, someone who is 7 years old would be very different to the way I pitch something to someone who's 15 years old. I think the same way we deal with children is the same way we should deal with adults. Like, you're not going to be able to pitch things. It's true. I think dependent on context,
there's actually there's a brilliant thing. I did some training with the Green Party about 12 months or so ago in terms of understanding different types of voters, and I mean, I won't go into the details now, but essentially what it does is it looks at who is this type of voter and who is that type of voter, and it sort of categorizes people based on sort of how political they are, how they would normally vote, reasons why they vote. But the biggest cohort of people are essentially, the people who have no interest in politics. They just want to make sure that they're okay. And actually, some they might vote, they might not vote. They're a bit indifferent, or they might go out and engage with politics on a general election, but they might not vote in the local elections. But understanding how to communicate with those people is massive. It's integral if you want to be successful. Khanifesto, what do you think?
I think there's sort of two aspects to this, which is the sort of narratives that you have to employ when running elections, right? And I think, like John was saying, I think the best way to focus on that is bread and butter. Um, if you're running a political party in a liberal democracy, then the main thing you want to be focused on is accessibility. In terms of the words you're using, but just the core focus you're using. The core focus of the policies you're using. So interestingly, I think it was the New York Times did an analysis of Zoran Mamdani's campaign compared to Andrew Cuomo's, who was the opposition in the NYC mayoral race. And what they found was the thing that Mamdani did differently was just the repeating multiple times specific policies. So that was either buses, that was either rent controls, it was either a universal childcare. And I think he mentioned those specific issues about 20 or so times over 90 videos, compared to Cuomo, who only mentioned them about 4 times, right? So you have to drill these things into people's heads and focus on a select few issues. So I think John is right. I'm not opposed to I'm not opposed to being anti-imperialist. Of course not. That's a value you should have on the left, is being anti-imperialist. But you should, and I hate to say this, if you are running in elections and your main electorate is not got imperialism in the front of their mind, you can convince people by proxy to be anti-imperialist, but you should focus on the bread and butter issues. And a good example of that is with the Green Party, right? The debate around trans people, which shouldn't be a debate, as we all know, concerns a very small percentage of people. But in the people that are against trans rights for whatever reason, they feel very polarized. They're not really open to debate that much. What you can do, and what the Green Party does well, focusing on bread and butter economic issues by proxy, you can convince people to be more pro-trans, right? I think No Justice MTG talks about this, which is like, it's a value you should always hold. Don't put it, don't discard it, talk about it. Just make sure that the main policies you're focused on are economic ones. On the other aspect, I think one thing the left needs to stop doing, which is a failure that they've done for almost, I'd say about 80 years now in the UK, is they treat class consciousness, like people becoming aware of their material conditions and the system as something to be changed and overcome, as something that can just happen through talk and education. The main thing that has historically raised people's class consciousness is action. Get people involved in politics, get them on the ground, get them in movements, get them organized, and through that they will have different understandings. Sometimes those understandings don't have to be verbal, they have to be action. It looks like occupying, it looks like being on a picket line, it looks like striking, it looks like unity amongst different sects of the working class. Not everything has to be verbal, and so I think the left really misses out on that when they treat everything as being a verbal experience rather than an experience gained through action.
I think Natalie Bennett speaks brilliantly on this, and she talks about this idea that people feel as though politics is something they have done to them, but actually politics is something that you can do. Like, you can get involved, you can get active, and actually it's more effective to do that than it is to just sit back and let it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I just to go through the comments, I'm conscious of time. I want
to. Oh, it's fine. Go for it. We've already missed traitors, so we'll have to pick it back up.
Yeah, you're right.
No spoilers.
Like iPlayer. Is the NATO line really going to be well received when Greenland is in Trump's crosshairs? Zach is wise to pinpoint Trump, and Jezza made the right move by tying support for the Venezuela coup to Trump.
I think that this whole question on NATO, right? Zach's attitude towards it has been completely proved right with everything that's happened. I think Zach has been completely vindicated in his comments. Will the line from your party be received well, which is essentially, let's just get rid of it completely? Probably not, given the circumstances. I don't know. What do you think?
I just think it's one of those issues that you have to solve by proxy. Unfortunately, late NATO is like in mass support. So I think it's one of those things you have to sort of put on the back to talk about, but it doesn't mean you can't enshrine your values in it. I think the rhetoric Polanski used around, sort of a European Defence Pact alliance, geographically works, and I think it'd be the safest bet. There is a barometer to how much you can push for stuff in these sort of things, but if you are to go about it in this way, achieving it through purely party rhetoric, then it has to be something you have to put on the back burner. I'm afraid that's just how electoral politics works.
Yeah, and I want you guys to respond to this actually. Where is it? Yeah, this one. The Greens aren't so distant by European standards, just centre left, and will capitulate like every social democrat.
What do you want? What do you want the Greens to do? Do you want them to walk around with a big stamp on their heads that say we are socialist? I mean, what the Green Party are advocating for are socialist values, socialist policies. I think the the comment about social democrat, fair enough. I hear it, but equally I have this little saying that I'd say, which is the electric light bulb was invented by candlelight, right? I believe, and not everyone on the left thinks this. There are many more radical than me that say that we need a complete revolution overnight, and that think that we can just oust the government and get socialism, and everyone will be happy. I mean, maybe that's possible, but for me, the reality is that we have to use the system that we've got in order to change the system. And I think if we can get parties like the Green Party into power, we can then change the system from the inside and improve it. When we're talking about nationalisation, when we're talking about bringing everything back into public ownership, when we're talking about making sure that the poorest in society, as a baseline, being poor for everyone means that you still have a roof over your head and food on your table. And once we reach that, then we can look at where else to go. Those things all come under socialism. And that is what the Green Party are doing.
Are they? Sorry.
Do you not think? Do you not think that's what?
I wouldn't say. I would say they are. Like, I wouldn't regard them as socialists. Like, I wouldn't say they're a socialist party. I would say they have like socialist pockets, sure. But like, I guess like again, maybe this is the elitism coming out in me.
I mean,
not like this pure socialist party. But I do think that there is, and I will say, and I think they have moved away from this. But like, I think they've moved away from this from my perspective, but I still think people still view them as these reusable coffee cup drinkers who use bikes for a living.
Right, but Zach stood on a platform of eco-socialism, right? And he got 80% of the vote. So
I know, and that's what I'm saying. Like, I do think that they have some aspects of socialism. I do think they have an eco-socialist manifesto. Like, and I think we all, as socialists, believe that the purpose of the economy is to produce social good, not private profit. So I do think that they do that, and I'm not against the Green Party. I'm not a fucking lib, but like I don't think they're any less than your party, to be honest. Like,
Khanifesto, what's your thoughts on this?
Well, every political party will capitulate. That's the nature of political parties. Whether we like them or not, I think that's what we need to understand. Corbyn capitulated on the IHRA definition. He's sort of capitulating in what sort of broad church he needs or thinks he needs. And it's not necessarily a moral premise that Jeremy Corbyn's Sultana, Zach Plansky had faith actors. It's just looking at the limits of electoralism and what you can achieve. There's a good quote by Rosa Luxemburg, which is like a socialist parliamentarian does not stay a socialist parliamentarian. They become like a bourgeois parliamentarian, not by any individual will or means, but because the system demands they capitulate. So in that aspect, I agree. I agree with the commenter. That's just how liberal democracy works. that doesn't mean you shouldn't be for or against liberal democracy. Everyone is entitled to their opinion on how they believe parliamentarism and party politics can work. But it's generally a broad fact that everyone realizes there's a limit there. In regards to like the Greens not being socialist, I think sometimes it depends how we all define socialism, I guess.
Yeah.
True. And
Yeah, I was
that's
partly going to
where
say that,
elitism
but
comes in. Yeah.
If you take it in a strict Marxist sense, then no party can be a socialist party. And so the commenter would be 100% right in that.
Yeah.
Well, I think
yeah.
sorry to interrupt, but I think Curtis just said it in the chat earlier on as well. I think he basically said that the Green Party aren't socialist, but nor he says no socialist party exists. He said your party isn't socialist. Labour wasn't socialist under Corbyn. I mean, if we want to drive down to we're doing this thing that we were just talking about at the left about getting Rick about it. But if we want to look at the the academic definitions and understanding of socialism, then no, okay, they're not. But I think in a modern day sense, I mean, I'm interested, Kiwi, that you think the Greens are just centre left, but then there's also this problem, which is that the Overton window has moved so far in the last decade or so that it may be that a moderate centre-left party are actually seen as socialists nowadays. I'm sure there are more radical things that the Green, but in fact, I know there are more radical things that the Green Party could do. But then I also think if they are full of people that have socialist values, and if the aim of the policies, whether this is the Greens or your party or anyone else, if the aim is to be more socialist, then right now I'm happy with not being perfectly pure socialist.
I think
let's try and make lives better for people, and then then we can debate whether it's Marxist or socialist enough for the left.
I think Kira's comment brings something interesting, which is like I was talking about earlier, which is like, of course, Kurs also said there's no such thing as a socialist party, which is largely also in agreement with this comment. I guess it's more so about the limits of electoralism. If people are voting expecting socialism, but they feel like, because again, socialism is different for everyone. If they're voting expecting that, and then they see that a party has capitulated, that does raise the question of how useful can parliamentarism be to a general socialist movement? I think an interesting debate.
So here's one for you then, and I'm aware of time, but I was talking about this the other day on TikTok. Zach has very publicly said that he wouldn't be willing to work with Keir Starmer. And I think it's a safe bet because it's unlikely that Starmer will be the leader of the Labour Party come the next general election. However, if he is, and there was a situation where reform, where there was a hung parliament, and basically Labour under Starmer needed the Greens to go into government with them in order to keep reform out of government, I believe that Zach Polanski and the Green Party would, in that scenario, say, you know what? Let's prop up a Labour government led by Starmer rather than allow Nigel Farage to get into government. And I guarantee that if that were to happen, there will be people, and I'm not saying that necessarily it's anyone here or Kira specifically with this comment, but there will absolutely be people on the left who will say, you're capitulating, you said you were never going to work with these libs, and now you're going into government with them. But the reality is, we live in the world that we are in, and we might not like it, but we've also got to look at reality here. And surely we want left-wing political parties, whoever they are, who want to actually improve people's lives, who have policies that will make poor people richer, that will tax the rich, that will say to the multi-billionaires, you know what, like, we are going to come for you and try to eradicate poverty. Surely that has to be more important than whether we can define a party as being properly socialist or properly this, or
I don't think it's about defining a party as purely socialist. I think it's just getting away from the idea that we have a socialist party in the Greens. Like, I want us to venture away from that, because yes, I'm someone who would say I'm a socialist, but I would also say that, yeah, I'm more akin to go for the Green Party just generally, because I find that they're more aggressive in their policies. But ask me this a year ago, and I would not have known where to vote, to be so completely honest with you, because the Greens weren't appealing to me, because they were so reasonable coffee cup tree hugging
So,
party, and that felt that it wasn't relatable. But now with Polanski, I
uh,
think they have gone in with that aggression.
so,
But I just,
so,
yeah,
so, well, your party spent an entire afternoon debating whether they should call themselves a socialist party or not. Does it actually matter? Does it matter whether we call the Greens or your party a socialist party, if what they are doing is actually, you know, creating policy that will make people better off?
no, arguing over names is silly, but I think understanding the crux of what a party stands for is important. And if you're someone who wants to posit themselves as a socialist party, then be ready to be like held to account for that. It's like, okay, well, if you claim you are socialist, let's discuss that. But then I guess maybe that's what we waste time on. Maybe we waste time with that sort of stuff. I agree with you. Let's just fucking get on with it. Let's just fucking get on with the fact that we want to make things better. We'll make people.
I could debate this all night, but I don't think people want us to do
Maybe you should set up a reform or revolution debate for the 21st century.
Literally.
Reform or revolution.
I think it's an important conversation to have, though, and it's always good to have opposing views, because I think it does test the limits on what we should be reliant on and what we shouldn't be reliant on. But there's of course there's pros and cons to both, and if you understand what you want to get out of it, then I think you can make the argument from either side.
Yeah,
I'm going to be a boring fence sitter. That's where I stand.
Whoa, Khanifesto, a boring fence sitter. Who would have seen the day?
You just don't want to upset people. That's all it is. I already get accused of being a lib, so.
Someone said it earlier. Oh, Cal in the chair.
I'll be making sure that specific clip is sent around all communist
platforms.
Twitter, Cal. So
yeah,
best watch out.
Right. I will just make this the last comment, because I do.
He doesn't have to, but I'm all right.
It will be. It will be, because traitors. The Greens and your party are both faux socialists.
It's the same conversation.
I know. They're led by liberals and are designed to absorb disillusioned socialists. That's the part that I want to unpack a little bit.
Okay.
Progressive change isn't possible via voting, but you will pretend it is. And that last two. So I know the first part is somewhat related to the top point, but the other two, I think, are...
So they're designed to absorb disillusioned socialists. Okay. I'd be interested to know, I mean, I don't know if they want to respond to this in the comments, but I'd be interested to know where they want those disillusioned socialists to go instead. And in terms of the last thing, progressive change isn't possible via voting, but you all pretend it is. The only alternative is violent revolution. So if you want to be all out revolutionary communist about this, then we need to forcibly seize the means of production, and we need to have not only a riot, but we need to have a full on civil war in order to generate it. I'm generally speaking, I wouldn't say I'm a complete pacifist, but I don't believe in killing people in order to get what I want politically, if there are other ways that we can do it. I do think progressive change is possible via voting. I think it is. I think there's other countries that are much more progressive than us, and I think it is possible via voting. We just need to be able to convince people. But for me, the only alternative, if we're not going to do it that way, is the violent revolution, which I personally don't agree with. And I know there's many lefties here in the chat who will be saying you're a complete lunatic because it is the only answer.
You're getting Curtis is giving you the lib accusations already. But no, I'm joking. But I think in regards to the comment, it just depends. What do you want?
Listen, I'm against political violence, so I don't think I don't see any other alternative than progressive change or political violence. Maybe there's something else.
I mean, without focus on like the hyper semantics in terms of liberals, faux socialists, however we define it, if we get to the crux of it, it's how you want society to be looking like organized, right? That at the end of the day, if you are in favor of like a democratic socialist government, perhaps despite sort of unrealistic, that's something you can push for within like party politics, right? If you're okay with like a very regulated capitalism, I don't see why you can't get that through party politics, social democracy. If you want a society which is organized around workers owning the means of production and the abolition of capitalism, that's quite unlikely through. I mean, that's unlikely through party politics. So it depends what you want out of these things. And in regards to
But
in,
what's
in
the but
regard,
what's the alternative to get that then? If that's not possible within the remit of party politics, what's the alternative? Pardon me? Do you agree with me that the alternative then has to be violent revolution, or do you think there's another way we can get that?
well, violent revolution. I mean,
we could do a
other
go on.
than let's just take revolutions as a whole. Historically, most have been violent. There's only been a small number. I'm no fan of like the USSR, state capitalist, authoritarian. The revolution that occurred there was largely not bloody if you discount the Civil War. You could look at things like, I know Rachel's talked about it. It's a mass strike. The idea that spontaneously workers decide, you know what, for X amount of days, we're all going on strike. Enough of us will go on strike to make the state realize that they don't have power over us, and thus from there we can move on to seizing workplaces. So I think it's largely dependent on. I think these things can happen non-violently.
But that's not a contradiction though, because what you do, because I agree with that. I'm all for strike action. I'm all for civil disobedience. I support the tactics of the likes of Just Stop Oil, for example, and other organisations that I'm not legally allowed to mention. And I think that I support those. I support those methods of change, which is, you could say, well, that isn't the same as voting, but who is it you're trying to convince, right? When you go on strike, you're sending a message to the government, so the people that are elected at the ballot box change their policy. So non-revolution in that sense, through strike action and civil disobedience, works hand in hand with party politics, does it not? And elections and democracy in the way that we understand it.
But revolutions aren't necessarily I think you're alluding to this as well, Callum, but like revolutions aren't necessarily defined by because when you say violent revolution, I think some people will presume that means like, oh, let's like guns and like let's just overthrow shit. But I think it's just that transfer of power. Like I think that like who controls the means of production and who controls the state and who controls the ability to shape society. And I think violence always will inevitably show up when the ruling class resists losing that control, which they always tend to do. But that's just a consequence of it. So
if you've got an elected government that's legislating against those things, that's nationalizing these amenities and putting those back into public ownership, and that's that's doing that in power, then there's less need for that. I mean, I do agree that it's not just as simple as voting, but if we look at where movements have been successful historically, unfortunately there often has been an element of violence to them. But even like, if we look at things like the suffragettes, for example, yes, they also used violence, but a lot of the method of protest was civil disobedience, like what we've seen through the likes of Just Stop Oil more recently. And I do agree that we need that in order to make change. If we didn't have that, if we didn't have the protests, if we didn't have the strikes, then yeah, I think we wouldn't get progressive change. But also, the commenter said, progressive change isn't possible via voting. Well, the NHS was progressive change, and we got that through a Labour government, through voting, right? We've all the progress that we've had, all the progressive change that we've had so far has come about through a mixture of protest, civil disobedience, and voting.
But look at how the ruling class now uses the NHS as a means to as like a theatre for violence, because they have, the ruling class relies on capitalism as a means to enact acts of structural violence, and I think that that's what's happening at the moment. So by means of austerity and exploitation, and even like border regimes that are happening at the moment, or the imperialism that's happening through the US quite explicitly, we are seeing violence be so normalized by the ruling classes.
Yeah.
It's not us that introduce violence; we just make their violence very visible when we respond to those things by hitting up our unions and by going on strike. I don't think that it's us that are being revolutionarily like violent. I think we're making the violence visible. I don't think
I
it's
mean,
us.
Kira's just said civil disobedience is violent as it is met with violence by the state, and I understand that point, but I don't think civil disobedience in and of itself is inherently violent. I think it's I agree. I think it's met with violence, but I mean, I don't see, I don't see linking arms and sitting in the middle of the road and blocking the M25 as violence, even if it's then met with violence, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's the state that are violent. The civil disobedience, may lead to that, but it isn't in and of itself inherently violent. There's a difference between the civil disobedience that we've seen from Just Up Oil or other movements throwing paint over things, for example, or causing a bit of disruption in the street, and I don't know, what Guy Fawkes was plotting to do, for example. And I do think that works. There's also the practical side of this, which is that, I think we have to also be realistic. I think in an ideal world, we'd overthrow the government, we'd seize the means of production, and we'd all live under communism, and it would work properly, and everybody would be happy with it, right? But that ideal world isn't going to happen. And for me, I do feel there's an element of we just have to be realistic, especially if the left want to be taken seriously, politically. I think I did have to chuckle because, I was at a protest recently, and it was there was a group of older men I think they were in their early 80s actually, and they were talking about how the revolution's just around the corner, and everything's about to change, and the left are about to have this huge insurgence, and we're about to get the real progressive change that we want from this revolution. And I did have to chuckle because these blokes who are in their 80s now, 60 years ago, were the same people that were, 16, 17 and going out at protests talking about how the revolution was just around the corner 60 years ago. And in another 20 years, those men won't be here anymore. As I worry that we're going to be living under a fascist regime, under the likes of Reform UK. And I just think that we have to use the systems that we're in, as shit as the system is, as much as it doesn't work, as much as it puts the elite above those at the bottom. We have to use the system that we have first and foremost before we can then make the change that we want to see. I honestly believe, and you know what? I hope that the people that increment Cal, as Deus Ex has said, yeah, I think we've got to bit by bit. Otherwise, I can't see how else it's going to work. I really don't.
I think the only last thing I'll say is, like, I think that all politics is violent. I think we live under an extremely violent system. And when we come out and denounce, I'm not talking about Callum specifically, denounce political violence. What is political violence, right? It's extremely violent that, like, homeless people die every day because we cannot house them, right? Would it be violence in response to, like, homeless people, after decades and decades, uprising against this and occupying housing for their benefit? Was it, sometimes I worry that the way we frame it is, if a modern day country that was colonized, like the Haitians, were fighting back, there would be some of us saying, well, violence isn't the way. Or if, like a feudal country was fighting back, we'd say violence isn't the way. Even when we see with, like, the ANC, which had a very low fatality rate for civilians, would we still say violence isn't the way? Like, violence already exists.
Yeah.
What is in response is just differing interests, right?
Exactly.
We shouldn't say political violence is, I mean, of course, denounce political violence individualistically or adventurism, but like, it would be a lie to say that, this is political violence, this isn't, right? We shouldn't make that arbitrary distinction. And I think the hyper focus on that sort of leads to this like sort of framing where we limit what people are allowed to do. Like in the 60s and the 70s, the Black Panther Party and the Black Liberation Army would be seen as terrorists. That's straight up true. Terrorists, right? But they were focusing mainly on the fact that they were being killed day in, day out by police officers for simply being black. Right? Like, is that violence in of itself to say we want the same amendment rights that you guys do as white people? I don't know if I would denounce it, because I am scared that denouncing political violence can lead to a situation where I would have to denounce the Black Liberation Army or the Black Panthers or like the ANC
True.
or the Haitians. And so, yeah, I mean, we could talk about this all night. But
in fairness, I think there's an element as well of, I think I'm looking at it through a very westernized lens. I'm looking at the situation that we're in, and I'm looking at it through that sort of lens, because you're completely right, and you've just got me thinking about things that I actively support, for example. And I think that all those examples that you've given are fantastic examples where I would absolutely support the people that others would argue are being violent. So yeah, really good point.
Yeah, great point. Thanks so much, guys. I'm just going to leave you with this thought. Imagine getting fired from the Tory party, and I'm gonna leave now. Thanks so much for an amazing conversation. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Sarah. Appreciate you as always. I do like a good debate. It's boring when we all agree, isn't it?
I agree.
So.
It's a good conversation. I imagine after this, everyone's going to be clipped and posted on different sects and factions online. So I can't me included. I can't
Listen,
wait for it.
it's one of those where we all I think we all want the same thing. I think we just disagree on how we get there, right? So, but yeah, but listen, thanks so much. Thanks, Khanifesto, as well, for joining tonight. You've been absolutely fantastic, as always. And thank you to everyone that's tuned in and watched from home. That is all that we have time for. I just want to say another massive thank you to everyone that's contributed to the show tonight, whether it's through the comments, whether it's through liking and sharing, whether it's from subscribing to our channel if you haven't already, and also to the extreme generosity of our community tonight in the way of memberships. So thank you for that. Remember, if you haven't done those things already, you can like the stream. And if you're not a subscriber, then hit that button. If you want to see Turn Left grow, then you can head over to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support, where there is a link to our Patreon, where you can support us monthly, or you can go to Ko-Fi and give us a one-time contribution as well. Alternatively, if you haven't been this evening in the multiple YouTube memberships that have been handed out, if you've not been included in those tonight, you can become a member on YouTube for just 99p. We're back with another episode of Normal Island on Monday, but until then, I'm Callum Taylor, and it's been a pleasure as always. Good night.